Welcome to the Prophecy Club, and today's topic is 5 Deceptions of Islam with Avi Lipkin. This presentation examines 5 foundational claims of Islam through the lens of biblical Christianity, comparing the teachings of the Quran and the Bible on God, Jesus Christ, peace, love, and divine revelation, made in 2003.
Good morning to everyone, and praise God. Good to be here. And I'm not offended if you say amen, hallelujah. That's the southern, under the Mason-Dixon line, Bible Belt way I usually work. Today we're going to work on a number of subjects, and the first part of this program we will talk about the 5 deceptions of Islam. Firstly, I want to issue a declaration, a statement that I used to be a person who hated Christians. And I'm a Jewish person. I grew up in the New York area, and in Hebrew school I was trained to hate Christians because of what happened in the Holocaust with the Germans, what happened with the Russians, the Polish, the Ukrainians, and the East Orthodox churches' persecutions, Catholic persecutions, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the expulsions from Europe. I moved to Israel at age 19 in 1986. I was a very, very angry person. And I wasn't a bigot. I hated everybody. And by the way, you know, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America, which only has blessed the Jews, never killed any Jews. You know, many of us said in Hebrew school in the 1960s, well, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, they haven't killed us yet, but be sure that they will come, that the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants will get us too. That's the way we were taught. I moved to Israel in 1969. In 1970, I met my bride, Rachel, and she, like myself, is Jewish, but she came from an Islamic country called Egypt. And the very first thing my wife said to me, she said to me, "What's the matter with you? Are you crazy?" That's the way my wife always talks to me. "Why did you leave America? America is such a golden country. It is a wonderful country. You have peace, you have prosperity, you have tranquility. And you left your parents and you left your family and you moved to Israel? Israel's a war zone." In 1968, 69, 70, we still had this war of attrition going on with the Egyptians and the Syrians. I didn't have to serve in the United States military. I was exempt because of the lottery during the Vietnam War. In Israel, I served 30 years in the Israeli Army Reserves, in addition to my regular service. I was 16 years in the artillery and 14 years as a spokesman. So my wife is right. Why did I leave America to come to Israel to serve in the army and to have a difficult life? It's not been easy living in Israel. My answer to my wife was, the Goyim hate us. Now, the word Goyim in Hebrew means the nations. And if you know from the Bible, in Exodus 19, verse 5, God creates the Old Testament, the eternal covenant with the Jews, where he says, "You will be my nation of priests, you will be a goy kadosh, you will be a holy nation." Now, 3,500 years ago at Mount Sinai, there were only pagans on the face of the earth. And the purpose of Mount Sinai was to create a nation of priests, a holy nation, a monotheistic nation, one God. And everybody else who was not part of Israel was considered the Goyim, which is plural for Goy. Goy is a nation, Goyim is the nation. So either you were Goy Kadosh, holy nation, or you were the Goyim, which was the non-Jews and the pagans. With the advent of Jesus of Nazareth and the New Testament, now you have all of a sudden a whole bunch of people who used to be Gentiles, but the moment you have accepted Jesus Christ, you are no longer Gentiles. Gentiles means pagans. Gentiles means the Goyim. So my wife said to me, "Who do you mean exactly when you say the Goyim?" I said, "The Christians." My wife said, No, you don't know anything." My wife always has said to me for 34 years, "You don't know anything. Are you crazy?" I mean, that's the way my wife gets my attention. She says in Egypt and in the Islamic countries, there are 3 groups. Yahudi is Jew, Messihi, from the word Messiah, is Christian. They're together. They're one people. In Arabic, Ahl el-Kitab. Ahl el-Kitab means the nation, the people of the book. Now, this will be very difficult for certain Jews and for certain Christians to swallow. The Jews and the Christians are one people? Yes, the Jews and the Christians are one people. We're the people of the book. We share the same God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. By the way, it says that 7 times in the New Testament. We have the same book, the Bible. And we all agree that the Messiah is a Jew who speaks Hebrew. The Muslims, they are the Goyim. The Muslims are the Gentiles. The Muslims have another God, Allah, and I will be speaking about the 5 deceptions of Islam, that Allah is not God, that Allah is Satan. Allah is not God. I'll prove this during this meeting. They have another book. They are not the people of the book. They are the people of the Quran. The Quran is a replacement theology book. It replaces the Bible, both the New Testament and Old Testament. And finally, the Messiah, according to Islam, Jesus of Nazareth, is coming back a second time as a Muslim, according to their faith, to murder all the Jews and Christians who have not converted to Islam. This is what Islam preaches. So the Jews and the Christians are one people, the people of the book. Christians cannot possibly be Gentiles. Gentiles are pagans. Pagans are the Muslims because they have a pagan God, Allah. So anyway, so this was my first contact with another way of thinking. And you have to understand it was very, very hard for me as a Jew from America to embrace what my wife was teaching. Because, you see, my wife grew up in Egypt. She was born in Egypt. She left after 20 years of living in Egypt. She was 20 years old when she left. And she listened to them in Arabic. She read the Quran in Arabic. She knew exactly what they were saying. And in Egypt, they're very, very proud. The Muslims are very proud in Egypt when they say to the Jews and to the Christians, we kill the Jews on Saturday because the Jews are the Saturday people, and we kill the Christians on Sunday because the Christians are the Sunday people. That's the only difference between Jews and Christians in the eyes of Islam. We are the Saturday people, and the Christians are the Sunday people. And you have to understand something, and it's a very painful thing for me to say. Jews who have been living in America or in Europe have a deep resentment against Christians because of what the Catholic Church did, not what the Protestant Reformation did. Protestant Reformation, by and large, was a great blessing to the Jews. And by the way, Jews, when they fled from Spain, many of them went to Morocco and Turkey under Islamic rule, but many went to Belgium and Holland and England under Oliver Cromwell, who was a Protestant leader. Jews were here from day one in America, in Canada, the US, and in South America. And there's a very long history. We don't have time to go into it. Maybe if we continue the programming, we will talk a little bit about the role that the Jews played even in the American Revolutionary War. The Jews saved the American Revolution in 1777 by giving George Washington all the gold they had in Philadelphia. He needed that money to pay the salaries for his soldiers. And if you want to know more about it, read about Chaim Solomon in Philadelphia in 1777. He was the leader of the Jewish community. And by the way, the debt was never repaid to the Jewish people. But the Jews were part of the American Revolution. It's a well-known fact. So for the American people, for the American Jews, the Christians are the enemy and the Muslims are the good guys because of 1492, the expulsion of the Jews and the Muslims from Spain by the Catholic King and Queen Ferdinand and Isabella. And what people don't understand in the Jewish world today, like I said before, is that the Protestant Reformation, the last 500 years of Protestantism, have been a blessing to the Jews. And today, the Protestants, I want to say the Christians, because there are good Catholic people and there are good Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox Christians who love Israel. Today the Christians are not our best friends, the Christians are our only friends, and Islam basically is the dragon that wants to devour the mother and child, meaning the Jews and the Christians. I listen to my wife. I really listen to her, but sometimes it takes 25 years till I understand what she's saying. And I praise God that my wife has been given the patience from God and the perseverance to stay with me. But the fact is that it wasn't until 1986 that I met a Christian woman from Texas, and it was this Christian woman who invited me for the first time at age 41. I went to a church in New Braunfels, Texas, and it was there that I saw that not only this Christian woman was in love with Israel, but her whole church was in love with Israel. And, you know, I have to tell you something. I'm a Jewish person. Jewish people have scales on their eyes. And by the way, Paul says that if God put the scales, on the eyes of the Jews. So the other half is only God can remove the scales from the eyes of the Jews. And God has been removing a number of scales one after another. And I'll give you some examples. And then this will lead us into the 5 deceptions of Islam. Deception number 1, I was writing to this Christian woman in 1986. Don't forget I was 37 years old. Still, I hated the Christians. And yet, there was this couple in Jerusalem by the name of Ray and Sharon Sanders. And they have a ministry called Christian Friends of Israel. And they put an ad in the paper looking for pen pals to correspond with American Zionist Christians. And I thought that was an oxymoron. How can an American Christian be a Zionist? So I started writing to this Nancy in Texas. And she wrote me the most nauseatingly sweet letters that one could imagine, something that only Christians could write. So she writes me this letter. She says, you Jews, you're all good people. And I said to her, Nancy, I said, you know, there are good Jews, there are bad Jews. Just like there are good Christians and bad Christians. You see, I had been indoctrinated in Hebrew school that all Christians were bad. So scale number 1 came off my eyes. There are good Christians and bad Christians. There are good Jews and there are bad Jews. Then I blamed all Christians for the Holocaust. So Nancy, this sweet, lovey-dovey yellow rose of Texas, writes me this letter that please forgive me for the Holocaust. Now, she was born in 1951 in the hill country of Texas. So she was born after the Holocaust. She was never in Europe. She never left Texas. She never left the hill country. So she says, I should forgive her for the Holocaust. She had nothing to do with the Holocaust. But you have to understand, that's scale number 2. I blamed all Christians for the Holocaust. I said, you're not guilty. And it's interesting that you, sweet and innocent Christians, always take the blame on yourselves for what the evil people did in Europe, and they're not even ready to recognize what they did to us, really, even today. And we'll talk about that with the roadmap, too. Third scale, I go to her church, and all of a sudden I see 400 people in her church, white people, black people, Hispanics, Native Americans, all crying tears to the Lord and for Israel. I said, the whole church is crazy for Israel. And praise God, since 1990, since November of 1990, I've been in over 400 churches of all denominations. And Baptist and Charismatic and Pentecostal and Lutheran and Presbyterian, Methodist. I've even been to 3 Catholic churches. And I've spoken to Greek and Russian Orthodox people. And so I go, you know, by the way, as a Jew, if you're not a denominational Christian, if you are a Jew, you can go to any church and love all the Christians. And by the way, I love the Southern Quartet Baptist gospel music. And I love the traditional Assemblies of God type music. And I love the liturgies of the other churches too. So I always have a wonderful time in the churches. But the bottom line is that all these churches love Israel. So the most important scale that came off my eyes is that the true Christians are loving people. And the true Christians love the Jews and love Israel. This is something that's very hard for Jews to understand. And many times when I'm in the home synagogue where I grew up in the northeastern United States, and they say, well, where are you going this time? I say, I'm going to Texas. They say to me, why are you going to Texas? They hate us in Texas. And it's not true. They love us in Texas. So I get into a lot of trouble with my fellow Jews saying, you Jews need to go to church on Sunday. And the Jews say, oh, a Jew for Jesus. I say, no, I'm a regular Jew, but let me tell you something. On Shabbat, on Sabbath, I go to the Jewish synagogue. And on Sunday to Friday, I go to the churches. You've got to learn the Bible the way the Christians teach the Bible, too. You've got to see the love that the Christians have for us. So in the end, many of them say, well, we don't go to synagogue. Why should we go to church? Then I started learning the New Testament. Because of this, Nancy, I went to seminary from 1991 to 1994. And there we studied New Testament. I had never touched the New Testament. And I think the 4 most important verses that I read in the New Testament, I was taught in the Jewish Theological Seminary. And it's Mark 12, 28 to 31. Jesus is discussing the law with his fellow rabbis. And they ask him, what's the most important commandment? He gives 2 commandments. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all thy strength. That's the first commandment. And the second commandment is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And so those are the 2 most important commandments according to Jesus of Nazareth. And then he says in the second half of verse 31, and this is the key to my message today, There are no commandments greater than these two. Okay? Now, love the Lord thy God, we know from Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5. Love thy fellow as thyself, we know from Leviticus 19, 18. So, Jesus is teaching the Jewish law to the Jews. You see, but Jews don't know that. Jews think that the New Testament was written by a Catholic priest in Sicily. So, and I say to the Jews, you need to read the New Testament. They say, a Jew for Jesus. I said, no, I'm a regular conservative Orthodox type Jew, but you need to read the New Testament because it's a Jewish book. If you don't read the New Testament, you can't understand the heart and soul of our allies and our brothers and sisters, the Christians. And what do they say? They say, we don't read the Old Testament. Why should we read the New Testament? Now, Jesus teaches that the two most important commandments are to love the Lord thy God and to love thy fellow as thyself. And that there are no commandments greater than these two. Well, guess what? These two commandments don't exist in the Quran. I'll give anyone here in this church $1 million if you can find those verses in the Quran, because you're not going to find them. They are not there. So wait a second. If Jesus says that these are the two most important commandments in the whole Bible, and they don't even exist in the Quran, doesn't that send up the red flags? Yes. Aren't the red lights blinking? Isn't there something wrong with the Quran if it's not there? Isn't there something wrong if it's not in the Hadith? And why should we love the Lord our God? Because our God is our Father, the ultimate creator of us and our parents and our grandparents all the way back. Now, parents create children to create human beings in their image. And I have a lot of fights with my wife about my sons. Are they more like me or are they more like her? And my grandchildren, I have fights with the other in-laws. Do the grandchildren reflect me more or the other grandparents? Anyway, we're very egotistical. We create children to be in our image. God creates us to be in his image because God is the ultimate creator. What makes parents happy? When kids radiate love back to the parents. What makes parents sad? When the kids don't radiate love back to the parents. So the first commandment of all to God is to love God. It's not in the Quran. You cannot have a personal relationship with Allah, but you can have a personal relationship with God. Love thy fellow as thyself, Leviticus 19:18. Why is that so important? Because all of us are created in the image of God. Okay? Now, what makes parents happy? When children grow up together, brothers and sisters, and they love each other, and they caress each other, and they play together, and then they grow up, go to school, study together, then they get married, they have children, they have the next generation, and then there are cousins and uncles and aunts, and the big Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, okay? When the family's all together. And what makes parents unhappy? When the children, the brothers and sisters, hate each other, pinch each other, kick each other, abuse each other, curse each other, stab each other, shoot each other, kill each other. And you know that there are families like that. Yes. The worst punishment for a parent is to bury a child. The worst punishment for a parent is to bury a child. God is the ultimate creator. Any human being, we're all created in his image, any human being who is killed or persecuted or tortured or enslaved, God cries for every one of us. And it doesn't matter if we're white or we're black or Hispanic or Native American or Chinese or Hindu or even Muslims. All human beings are created in the image of God. So Islam, this is the first deception of Islam. Islam is not a religion of love. Islam is a religion of hatred. Muslims can be loving people because they're human beings created in the image of God, and our God is a God of love. It's like I used to hate the Germans. Today I love the Germans, but I will fight Nazism to the death. I love the Russians, but I'll fight communism to the death. And I love the Muslims. They're good people. I love the Muslims. Don't anyone leave here today thinking that I hate the Muslims. I love the Muslims, but their system, Islam, is a satanic system bent on killing every human being on the face of the earth, including the Muslims. Second deception. Islam is a religion of peace. We've all heard this. And that Islam comes from the word salam. Salam is like shalom, means peace. But in English, there's a simple explanation. Pacification in English comes from the word peace. But pacification does not mean peace. Pacification, if you remember the good old days of the Vietnam War, this Viet Cong village or that Viet Cong village was pacified, usually meant immolated in napalm. Yes. Islam means the pacification of the infidel or the forced conversion or destruction of the infidel. Let's look at who the infidel is. The infidel is the Jew, the Christian, the Hindu, the Buddhist, the black, the jungle peoples. Anyone who's not a Muslim is an infidel. And by the way, many Muslims are infidels too because they're not good enough Muslims. So where do you draw the line? Islam preaches that there is the Dar es-Salam, the house of Islam, the house of peace, and there's the Dar el-Harb, the house of war, the house of the infidel. By definition, Islam teaches there cannot be peace on the face of the earth until the Dar es-Salam conquers the Dar el-Harb, meaning that there are no more people on the face of the earth other than Muslims. This is their bottom line. Now, this means if you got 2 billion Christians and Jews and 1 billion Hindus and 2 billion Buddhists, that's 5 billion human beings and 1 billion Muslims. It means 1 billion Muslims are going to have the victory over 5 billion non-Muslims, meaning the killing of 5/6 of the human race, so that 1 billion Muslims who are left will go ahead and kill each other, which is what we see from the history of the Islamic world. You know, there's a joke. What is the difference between neurotic people and psychotic people? Now, neurotic people dream about castles in the air. Now, that's all of us. We all dream. When do you stop dreaming? When you're dead in the grave. As long as we're alive, we dream. It's okay to be neurotic to some degree. Psychotic people don't dream. They live in castles in the air. And psychiatrists collect the rent. Now, Hitler was psychotic for 2 reasons. He lived in castles in the air. He believed he could conquer the earth, which no human being can do. You know, Alexander the Great tried it. The Romans tried it. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, nobody can conquer the earth and control it. Only God can. And secondly, Hitler lived in castles in the air because he believed he could kill all the Jews on the face of the earth. Now, we have God's kingdom terminology, and we have this kingdom terminology. In God's kingdom terminology, we know from Jeremiah 31 that there will be no more Jews on the face of the earth when the moon, the sun, and the stars stop shining. Meaning there will always be Jews on the face of the earth. That's God's word in Jeremiah 31. In this kingdom terminology, we know that the Jews are scattered to all 4 corners of the earth, which means if you can't conquer the whole earth, you can't kill all the Jews. So it is an impossibility to destroy all the Jews, and by the way, God said it too. So what would you say about the Muslims? That like Hitler, they want to conquer the earth, which we said is a psychosis. They want to kill all the Jews, which is a psychosis. And there are only like 15 million of us on the face of the earth. But there are 2 billion Christians, and they want to kill the Christians too. And there are 1 billion Hindus, and they want to kill the Hindus too. And there are 2 billion Buddhists, and they want to kill the Buddhists too. And they want to kill all the blacks in Africa. So if you ask me, anybody who believes that they can kill 5 billion human beings is psychotic. And, I said this to Jerry Falwell. I don't know if you remember, Jerry Falwell, Franklin Graham, and Pat Robertson were quoted as saying that Islam is an evil religion. And I did a 1-hour TV show, Listen America, with Jerry Falwell in October. And after we were finished taping, I said to him off the air, I said, I disagree with you. He said, why? What did I say? He said, you said that Islam was an evil religion. Well, Islam is not a religion at all. Islam is a sickness. Islam is a psychosis. Because any so-called religion or any cultic faith which says that you can wipe out 5/6 of the human race so that 1 billion Muslims will remain, that's a psychosis. If you look at the Islamic utopias, where the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Jew, and the Christian have been wiped out, let's take, for example, Afghanistan. After the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Jew, and the Christian were erased, and you're only left with Muslims, what do the Muslims do? They kill each other. You've got in Afghanistan the Pashtuns, they're like the Pakistanis. You have the Uzbeks and the Tajiks, they're like their brothers across the former Soviet border. And then you've got the Hazaras, who are Shiite Muslims related to their brothers in Iran. And what have they been doing for hundreds of years? Slaughtering each other. What do we see in Pakistan? That the Sunni and Shiite are slaughtering each other. What do we see in Saudi Arabia? What do we see in the Gulf area? Sunnis and Shiites, Muslims, slaughtering each other. What do we see in Algeria, where there are only Sunni Muslims? You have over 100,000 dead people in the last 7 years in a civil war between the Muslims and the more extreme Muslims. And you see this in Somalia. And by the way, Saddam Hussein killed 2 million Muslims. And nobody talks about the fact that Muslims slaughter Muslims like there's no tomorrow. Third deception. So Islam is not a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of war. Third deception. You've all heard it said by the Muslims that Allah is just another name for God. And Allah is not God. Allah is Satan. And I'm going to show it to you in a few minutes why. Firstly, let's look at our God. The God of the Jews and the God of the Christians is the same God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And in case you have any doubts about it, you can read that in the New Testament 7 times, and especially in the first gospel, first chapter, first page, first words of the New Testament. These are the generations of Jesus Christ. And what do you see? 14 generations and 14 generations and so on. And in the middle, what do you see? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Doesn't say Ishmael. But what do the Muslims say? That it was Ishmael who was supposed to be sacrificed, not Isaac. That God did not choose Isaac. But God says 5 times in Genesis that he chose Isaac. But the Muslims say, no, he chose Ishmael. And by the way, do you know where Ishmael was supposed to be sacrificed? Not on Mount Moriah, not in Jerusalem. He was supposed to be sacrificed in Mecca, where the black stone, the Kaaba is, the holiest site of Islam. So we have a completely different story here. And you know, God gave us the Torah around 3500 BC. God gave us the New Testament in the 1st century AD. And all of a sudden, 7 centuries after the New Testament, 22 centuries after the Old Testament, all of a sudden, Johnny come lately, Muhammad decides, guess what? It was Ishmael. Now, how do we know it wasn't Ishmael? You know, we all love King David. King David is great for the Jews and the Christians. But King David was disqualified by God from building the temple in Jerusalem because he was a man of the sword. God doesn't like the sword. Why doesn't God like the sword? Because the sword is an implement of death that kills the human beings who are created in the image of God. So God doesn't like the sword. And what do we know from Genesis about Ishmael and Esau? That they were men of the sword. And of course, Esau, we also know that he married the daughters of Ishmael and became an Ishmaelite. So you have a dichotomy here. This is not a question of sibling rivalries, brothers and sisters. This is not sibling rivalries. This is a question of the Spirit of God versus the spirit of the sword. What do we know about Ishmael? When Hagar, the maidservant, was pregnant with Abraham's son, first son, the angel of the Lord appears unto her and says, you're going to have a son. His name is going to be Ishmael. And Ishmael is going to be, it says in Hebrew, Pere Adam. Pere Adam. Adam means a human being, a man. Adam is a man. Pere is like in Spanish, burro. He's going to be a mule. Pere means a mule, a wild ass of a man. Have you ever seen a wild donkey kicking in all directions? This was Ishmael. This is one of the most prophetic, this is Prophecy Club. This is one of the most prophetic verses in the whole Bible. Ishmael will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against all his brothers. This is an exact definition of the spirit of Islam. His hand will be against all his brothers, and his brothers' hands will be against his hand, and he will dwell in the face of his brethren. Now, you know the American slang, hey man, you're in my face. Well, that comes from the Bible. It means war. When somebody says to you, hey man, you're in my face, you better get out of my face, that means there's going to be a big fight. This is from these verses in the Bible, in Genesis, where God says to Hagar, your son is going to be a wild donkey of a man. He will live in the face of his brethren, meaning fighting. And a few chapters later in the Bible, it says, he died in the face of his brethren. He who lives by the sword, dies by the sword. Does God like the sword? No. So this is the reason that God chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were farmers and they were shepherds. They were part of God's creation plan. Ishmael and Esau were men of the sword. They were brigands. They were desert warriors. They were part of God's destruction plan. So this war with Islam only started 1,400 years ago, but the prophecy about Ishmael takes us all the way back to 3,500 years ago. And if you want to make it even more difficult, if you go back to Adam and Eve, the serpent the dragon. So you have it all the way in Adam and Eve, and you have it all the way in Revelation 11 and Revelation 17. The dragon, the serpent, which is Islam. And we're going to talk more about that later. So, we know who our God is. And by the way, I think that it is outrageous for any Jew or Christian to prostrate himself or herself before Yasser Arafat or Abu Mazen or the kings and princes of the Islamic world, because anybody who renders their knee and comes down to their knees in front of these people, even though they have all that oil money and that oil power, you know, what you're doing basically is you are legitimizing that religion, that so-called religion, that psychosis, that delegitimizes the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if you're a Christian, then Jesus Christ comes from the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not from Ishmael. And any Christian or any Jew who supports Islam is a heretic and an infidel. Because what they're doing is they are supporting the opposition. You have God, you've got Satan. You've got good, you've got evil, you've got light, you've got darkness. Anybody who goes with the Muslims, and we're going to talk about the roadmap, because there's a reason I'm saying this. Everything has a reason. Let's look at Allah. To understand Allah, you have to understand the life of Muhammad. Muhammad was a very bright, he was a brilliant person. He suffered from epilepsy, though. Epilepsy is not a mental illness, but it is a neurological illness. And he would receive his revelations of Allah during his epileptic fits. He would fall to the ground, he would froth at the mouth, he would be shaking uncontrollably, and he would have this feeling of choking to death. And while he was choking to death, that's when he heard the voices. Now, how do you say a voice in Greek? D-E-M-O-N. Demon. What he heard was not God. What he heard was demons. Anyway, so one day he comes to his wife and says, am I mad that I hear voices, or am I a prophet? And of course his wife said, oh, mon chéri, of course you are a prophet. What is she going to say? You're nuts? So he went to the Jews in Mecca and Medina, and he went to the Christians and said, I'm the greatest of all the prophets. I'm greater than Moses to the Jews, and I'm greater than Jesus Christ to the Christians. So the Jews and the Christians said, thank you, but no thanks. They gave him his marching orders. So now he was offended. So now he said, you know what? I'm going to teach those Jews and those Christians a lesson. I'm going to do something that's going to be even greater than Judeo-Christianity. I'm going to create a God. They had 360 pagan gods. One was called Allah, Al-Ilahi, the moon god, the war god, the sword god. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to abolish all the other gods, 359 of them, and I'm going to crown, like in checkers. You know, you have the simple checker players, and then when they get to the other side, you crown them. It becomes all of a sudden all-powerful. Al-Ilahi, Allah, will be the greatest of all the gods on the face of the earth. He will be our monotheistic God. And he will be greater than the God of the Jews and the Christians. Okay? Now, if you've ever heard the call to prayer of Islam, they say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Now, CNN says that means God is great. Now, isn't it wonderful that we know, don't we know that God is great? But if CNN says it, better watch out. Because that's not what it means. Allahu Akbar, Akbar in Arabic means greater. Allah is greater. The God that Muhammad chose, this pagan moon god, war god, and sword god, is greater than the God of the Jews and the Christians down the street. Allah is greater? Who said he was greater than God before his fall? Lucifer, Satan. Allah is just another form of Satan. It's just another form of the dragon. Let's look, okay, that's theory. Let's look at it in practice. Chapter 5, verse 51 of the Quran. You know, we know, Jews and Christians, we know from the Bible that the Jews are the apple of God's eye. Amen? We know from the Bible that the Christians are grafted into the Jews. In other words, the Christians have chosen to be grafted into the apple of God's eye, which makes you all the apple of God's eye too. And God created an Old Testament for the Jews and a New Testament for the Christians, and together we are the apple of God's eye. Now, I have a question. Is God crazy? No. Is he a liar? No. Does he break his promises? No. So how can it be that in the chapter 5, verse 51 of the Quran, it says, believers, Muslims, take neither the Jews nor the Christians for your friends. The Jews and the Christians are friends with one another. Whoever befriends them will become one of their number. Allah does not guide the wrongdoer. See, Allah doesn't like the Jews and the Christians. My wife, Rachel, monitors the Israeli Arabic radio service. She monitors the radio programs of Saudi Arabia and Syria and Egypt and the PLO and all these different groups. She comes home sometimes crying and shaking, and she has to take a sedative from the crazy vitriolic poison of the Muslims. And they say, for example, in their preachings in the mosque, kill the Jews, kill the Christians, kill the Israelis, kill the Americans, kill the children of the ape, and kill the children of the swine. Now, every Muslim school child knows that verse in chapter 5 of the Quran. The Jews are the children of the ape, the Christians are the children of the swine, and we are to be slaughtered together. That's what they preach. Every Muslim school child knows the verse. Allah hates the Jews and hates the Christians. Then there's a teaching from the Hadith. On the Day of Judgment, there will be a final battle, and Muslims will annihilate every Jew on the face of the earth.
And that ends approximately 30 minutes of a 2.5-hour video. You do want to watch the rest of it for free for the rest of August 2026 at watchprophecyclub.com, watchprophecyclub.com. Also, if God has blessed you, and you can help Prophecy Club now, be a really good time because, first of all, it's summer, and probably we got another month before we get through this where things start turning back to normal, but we've also lost all 3 of our sponsors due to no fault of our own, just that's kind of the way it happened. And unfortunately, it has thrown us into a pretty good jam, pretty good pinch. So if God's blessed you and you can help us right now, that would be a really, really good thing. WatchProphecyClub.com. WatchProphecyClub.com. Go watch these 8 videos. Let me back up and give you a little history on the Prophecy Club. So God called me to start the Prophecy Club in June of 1993. We invited guest speakers. Matter of fact, we invited 160 guest speakers, making 330 DVDs. We used to ask a donation of $30 per DVD, but they're all now available for $200 a year or $20 a month. You can unsubscribe anytime you want to. There's no contracts on them. So let me explain the 8 DVD offer we're giving right now. You can go watch all of these free at watchprophecyclub.com right now today. The first one is called Chrislam, The Nation Killer by Leslie Johnson. It compares Christianity and Islam, showing that Allah is not Jehovah God. Chrislam says that Allah, the Islamic God, and Jehovah are actually the same God, and puts Qurans and Bibles in the same pews. Wrong. The next DVD is called 5 Deceptions of Islam by Avi Lipkin. This presentation examines 5 foundational claims of Islam through the lens of biblical Christianity, comparing the teachings of the Quran and the Bible on God, Jesus Christ, peace, love, and divine revelation. Then we have Jesus, Jews, and Jihad by Marvin Yakos. Now look at this. This guy was a former jihadist himself. He spent 15 years studying the Vedic scriptures and 20 years studying Islam, Quran, and Hadith. After his miraculous salvation, God showed him in a vision that Islam would invade the world with one final jihad. We know it as Armageddon. He says the goal of Islam is to, listen carefully, kill or enslave the world. Islam kills or enslaves captured men and makes women sex slaves. You'll learn the frightening truth about Islam and the number 1 enemy of Christianity. So you can watch 8 of these DVDs free to watch through the month of August. Part of it is also Atomic Iran. Now, this Dr. Jerome Corsi, a Harvard graduate, author of 15 books, and an expert on political violence, and he has spoken before the Israeli Knesset. He used to have a top secret clearance, and he says that Iran will use atomic weapons, just like Trump says. And Iran has proclaimed that a mullah, an Islamic messiah, will one day return to destroy the infidels, that's anybody that's not Muslim, and usher in a new Islamic global government, once again heading to Armageddon. But also offering Islam and Prophecy. I made this one. I examine the relationship between Islam and Bible prophecy, exploring prophetic interpretations, end-time scenarios, and questions about the future role of Islam in world events from a biblical perspective. Then Bill Federer came to make Islamic Conquest, Past or Present. He explores a historical rise and expansion of Islam, examining key military campaigns, what they've done in the past, crusades, influential historical figures, and the lasting impact of Islamic civilization on world history. It also considers how these events continue to shape our culture, religion, and global affairs today. Finally, Islamic Jesus versus Biblical Jesus. James Sundquist gives 22 scriptural reasons why the Islamic and the biblical Jesus are not the same. He tells what Islamic Jesus says he will do when he returns to the earth. Is Islam a religion of peace? Is the biblical Jesus the same as the Muslim scriptures describe? Is Islamic Jesus the Prince of Peace or another masquerade of the Prince of Darkness? Israel, Islam, and Biochemical Nuclear Terrorism by Bill Schneblin. This guy's really good. He gives you what prophecy says will come, as well as what is likely to come in the next war or the confirmation of the covenant and starts the tribulation. Bill explains how the Muslim religion creates terrorists who will kill thousands of Americans and exposes who Allah really is. You can watch 8 of them right now, free to watch through the month of August 2026. So here's what you look like. You go to watchprophecyclub.com. This is the way it looks. You click in the top right corner, sign in. And you can go in and sign up, quit anytime you want to. But through the month of August, you can watch all 9 of these free.